hello. Thank you for joining me. Um,
Yeah, well, thank you for having me.
no, yeah, yeah. It's like, who loves to talk about games? Fiona loves to talk about games. First port of call.
Let's get her on so she can
Yeah.
talk.
So it is Candela Obscura week, which is sort of
Mm.
a soft launch kind of thing. I haven't seen it being pushed like a huge amount, like on the YouTube channel
Mm.
or Critical Role's channel or anything. But definitely like on their Discord and on um,
Hmm.
Twitter and things like that. They're sort of posting about.
Hmm.
And there's a handful of events. I think there's a lot of events happening in America. There's like two events happening in the UK. Um,
Yeah. Hmm.
but it is a thing where they are encouraging people to jump online and talk about Candela Obscura. So I thought, yeah, I could do that. Um,
Yeah.
I don't think you've covered it yet on your regular sort of streams and chats.
It was I did it as a very early test stream for Too Long Didn't Read, like really early on, and that was a quick start. But apart from that, I've not looked at I got like the full copy and everything, but I never really sort of looked into it as much. Like again, I've done a few little bits and pieces and just yeah to see what it was because there was lots of like chat about it at the time, lots of chatter going, oh, this is amazing because it was their first sort of like big push towards an RPG and doing something different for Critical Role as well. Like it wasn't fantasy; it was like we're going into a little bit of horror and stuff for their limited series. So I was like, oh well, I want to get on that bandwagon quickly, and then promptly fell off the bandwagon very quickly.
Yeah, it was their first launch um, a while back. I think we'll cover that in like a second because that was kind of the first talking point that I sent to you. That I was like, huh, that's actually quite a
Mm.
large talking point.
Hmm.
um, but yeah, so it is Critical Role's first foray into they're making their own games. But they've
Hmm.
got a few things out now. They've got some couple of board gamey things, and they've got Daggerheart.
Daggerheart, yeah, Daggerheart. I think is their biggest push just now because I think I suspect they're gonna once this current series of Critical Role is done, they're gonna switch over to Daggerheart and be like, that's us for the foreseeable future. I think they put a lot of effort into that because I think their brand is like the more fantasy stuff rather than necessarily like the horror stuff or they did like Deadwood, like I think another sort of they do little limited series of stuff, but I think they're sort of their what's the word, like their sort of creme de la creme is like we like doing high fantasy as the stuff that they really enjoy and then not necessarily doing like a long-term horror or sci-fi campaign or anything like that.
Yeah, it definitely wouldn't shock me if they did that. This does feel like it's more designed for like one shots or like short arcs, kind of
Mm.
like how like Monster of the Week and Call of Cthulhu is because it's very like in that vein of games.
Hmm.
And yeah,
Hmm.
Daggerheart feels like it's specifically designed for like long format with the card system of where you're kind
Hmm.
of building your character as you go,
Yeah, yeah. Hmm.
which I do like. The
Hmm.
concept of that at least. I haven't read Daggerheart. I don't know. Um,
Hmm.
but I think it's important to touch just on the off straight away that all of
Yeah.
these things have kind of been born of the OGL crisis or scandal. Sorry, scandal's the better word.
I mean, it's a crisis. It was a crisis for many people at the time as well. But yes, scandal for
It
sure,
was a panic.
controversy,
I mean,
etc.
there's some argument that it got blown a little out of proportion, but it definitely sparked a panic in the community, particularly like those people who like to write supplementary materials and things like that.
Mm.
And we've definitely seen an influx of um, content creators designing games,
Mm.
um, which is obviously this is interesting. It's impossible for us to say sat here whether that would have happened anyway, whether all those people were just working on stuff and they were inevitable that they were going to start designing games as the hobby took off popularity.
Hmm.
Maybe we
Hmm.
this is where we would be regardless. Um,
Hmm.
but it definitely feels like the OGL scandal fueled the
I
fire.
I think it was a proper turning point for sure. Like, because you and I both play loads and run loads of other systems that aren't D&D Fifth Edition, and I know personally that lots of people obviously that's their first game. It was my first game, that system, and then I can imagine it being it's incredibly easy that you're having that sort of source reference system. A system reference document and having that and be like, well, I can create my own adventures, I can do stuff, and then make a little bit of money, because it's a creative endeavor. And then I can understand why the OGL, they were like, well, we'd like, we want to put it into this sort of formalized way to have like, with the 50th anniversary coming up, all that sort of thing. And it just was so badly handled. And it was just, and released in a very interesting sort of Coolidge. I can't remember their name, but they released this article and it blew everything like for a whole month. Like I remember because I run the DM's book club, as you know, like a D&D weekly D&D. Like where we just read the lore, we don't have anything to do like necessarily like that, and we do lots of different third party stuff like that. And in the same month, we were nominated on like I think it was the N World like best podcasts like discussion podcasts. And when they read out the announcements, the host, I think a bit unprofessionally, like ripped into us because we liked D&D, and clearly hadn't listened to any of our stuff or anything like that. But because he was so in like angry about the OGL stuff that was completely out of our hands, and didn't appreciate, didn't like, because all the other submissions were like for different discussion topics on Call of Cthulhu or Blades in the Dark and stuff like that. So it was a very awkward time to be a fan of D&D.
Yeah.
And I'm not necessarily a fan of D&D. Like I critique it quite a lot and say well, how you can change things and stuff like that. So I was very much a big fan of people being pushed to try new things. And there was like the Orc license that came out, encouraging people to like use different systems, and that was really good. But I don't think there was as much of a like suddenly I think it took its time. Like we felt the wave, and now with Candela Obscura and then like Daggerheart stuff, like I think now we're now seeing the fruits of the process and stuff like that. I think we're going to see a lot more in the next couple of years or so because of the OGL crisis. I think we're just hitting the big first wave.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. It's going to be a defining moment. As indeed is just sort of the rising popularity of these games in general. It's all just sort of happening. It was just came out. I mean, for Wizards of the Coast, it just was the wrong thing at the wrong time, because it was just at that peak of like, everyone loves these games again, and then they just shat on the fan base from on high. You're like,
and I
what
mean,
are you
it's
doing?
continuing going on. Like, it's continuing going on. Like there's been, you might have noticed, there's so many more collaborations from Wizards of like just stuff. There's like merch, there's like Minecraft, there's the D&D movie and stuff like that. And that's what they're pushing towards. They don't necessarily care too much about like settings or adventures and stuff like that. That's part of it, but they're like, well, how much more can we monetize? And that's definitely a theme coming throughout. And then of course you had like stuff like, again, separate to D&D, you had the Pinkerton stuff with Magic the Gathering, where basically, just in case people know, I mean, this is a very bare bones of it, but somebody got sent some cards early by mistake, showed them online, and then the Pinkertons, which is this terrifying like collective agency in the US, came to take them back. There's AI art controversy that happened in one of the source books that released last year, and then just before Christmas last year, about 1,000 employees over the cross of Hasbro were just left, was sort of fired on the spot, including quite a lot of people who had been working on the 50th anniversary books and like the Book of Many Things, all these sort of things that were coming out, and you're like, God, this is a rubbish time to be supporting that sort of company.
They do seem
clearly
determined.
don't care about anyone else.
Yeah, they do seem determined to be the villains of their own story, which is a very strange stance to take.
But as you said, it's now what a good opportunity if people are feeling a bit miserable about stuff. They can go, right, let's actually go and see what else is out there, and encourage people to go and see. Like I know people who switched over instantly to Pathfinder because they were like, well, we still want to play our games, but we don't want to support this company. So the willingness is there, and there was definitely with the OGL stuff. There's people were cancelling their D&D Beyond accounts and subscriptions, and that's what stopped them eventually from implementing it. They're like, we are losing our fan base. So it can be done. Turns out like if you all unite against one cause, you can absolutely change it. And
I think the thing that Wizards didn't realize is how much they just were coasting on brand recognition. Like even Critical Role, they were playing Pathfinder before they came on Geek and Sundry. They only switched to D&D because of the brand recognition. If they put a show as like, we're playing Pathfinder, most people would be like, what the hell is that? I have absolutely no idea. I mean, I've never played Pathfinder, and I've been playing games for over 20 years. It just has never crossed my table. So yeah, they even, it's just the brand recognition. No one, they don't think, and I think they assumed that everybody loves their game, as opposed to everybody just sort of loving the hobby and just playing D&D because it's the most readily available.
Yeah,
So I think
and
they
and
underestimated their importance to the hobby. Other than historically, obviously, it's a very important game, the
yeah.
most important game. But I think they like
Mhm.
overestimated their own significance a little bit.
And I think they're very aware of it now, and it's been interesting. This is the last thing I'll say, obviously, on the D&D stuff, because obviously that's not what we're here to talk about.
No,
But the with the new 50th coming up with all with like a new, she says in quotation marks, D&D books and all that sort of thing. It was interesting how they were going about playtesting, because they've always done playtesting throughout their history of like checking stuff in and stuff like that, and having that like the sort of almost drip feeding and people getting and as they said in their stuff was like they're trying to break the game so that people can like show that they're passionate about it. And they got a lot of feedback, so that was quite an interesting like more community thing. And then where you have Daggerheart, I appreciate you haven't read it at all, but they just Critical Role earlier this year just released a 400-page manuscript saying, "Boof, there's the whole system of everything in it. We want you to break it and let us know, and then we'll update it." And then presumably a Kickstarter or something like that with art and all that sort of thing. But they were just like, "We're going to give you the whole game. We want you to test it and go out there." And it was just two different approaches to how to play test and to get excited about a document. But that I just going back to what you're saying about that brand recognition, I think now because Critical Role is so big, like even people, even my mum knows who they are. So now it makes total sense that they are going to go like, well, we're going to play our own system, because then the fans are like, well, I want to play the system that the people I watch play, because I think they've realized that turning point that they don't need to rely on that brand appeal of D&D anymore. And I think it shows. And I'm not saying that Critical Role themselves, they are the perfect like paradigms of this, of like how you should play RPGs or even write RPGs. But I think it's interesting once you have that following an audience of streaming something. You could pretty much do anything, I think, in the TTRPG community, like create new games. So like Matt Colville, for example, for years wrote so many D&D modules or advice, etc. Has now like is launching his own system, and it was like one of the most successful Kickstarters for an RPG system, which we haven't seen yet. For like, oh, I think it was over $4 million or something like
mm.
that, and I'm like, that is wild. But because he had such a following that he built up from that brand recognition of D&D and then his connections, and then he was like, right, we're going to change I don't want to support D&D anymore. I want to create my own thing.
Yeah,
So
I mean that might be the flip side of the mistake they made, is that they assumed that all those people like Matt Colville, people were popular because of D&D, as opposed to that D&D is popular because of Matt Colville.
yeah,
It's because
yeah,
what the work that
absolutely,
they
yeah.
do is why people are playing a game.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, that's the whole thing. That's the talking point. I just felt like we couldn't really avoid, just because
No, no.
it's a whole thing. I don't know. I'm off the top of my head, I don't know, but Candela Obscura was one of the earliest announcements of like, hey, one of these big
I
content creators.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, like you said, it was one of their first games that they announced. Like you said, they'd been doing dabbling with a bit of board games, but then this was their first system that they hadn't done a limited series or a run through before. Like the Quick Start got released at the same time they did their limited series of the first game, which I thought was really interesting. And it totally makes sense that you would, if you've got a new game, you'd want to show a playthrough of it in some description. And what better playthrough than to have voice actors that you know and love playing a game, and you're looking along. And also, it was an interesting for them to, like, as I said, have a huge break from high fantasy. Maybe they were like, you know what, we can't do Daggerheart just now. Maybe we can't do too much in high fantasy because it's going to seem similar to the OGL stuff. Tell you what, we've done a few Call of Cthulhu games. Why don't we do our own horror game?
Yeah,
And they've had like live shows of Candela Obscura now. As you said, they sort of contained one shots as well as with the limited series, and people love it. People keep coming to it. Which always is interests me, because I know people are like, oh, I don't like horror. I'm like, yeah, you do. I've seen you go to those shows.
yeah. Everyone kind of likes horror. It's just your level of you know.
Yeah, it's a veil that goes over quite a few stories, I
Yeah,
think,
yeah,
and
yeah.
depending on how thick that veil is, all that sort of thing.
And it works good in gaming because it's an easy way to you want tension and you want all those things which we don't want to, like I say, once we get off this talking point we'll stop talking about D&D,
I know.
but those things that
Yeah,
D&D
exactly.
doesn't
It's like I
really
could talk about it forever.
doesn't really do very well.
Yeah.
Which is horror is heavy on that list of things that D&D just doesn't really work for. It's a power fantasy game. It doesn't do horror.
Yeah.
I'm not that scared. No matter what's happening.
It's more of a sigh going, oh no, we have to defeat this big bad, which is horrible. Yeah. Mm.
Anyway, let's talk about the game.
Yeah, of course, of course.
So, um, I
Okay,
want to
get the physical books out. Yeah.
physical books. Look at us
We're-
go. Um,
No.
I want to start with the production, which is this is a beautiful book.
It
It's
really is nice.
probably
Yeah.
it might be the nicest book on my shelf. Um, However, that comes with a however,
hmm
because a tad overproduced, and as a result,
Mm.
one of the more expensive books on my shelf. I mean, just
Yes.
for its retail
Was
price, particularly from their website.
hmm I think I got it for like £35, I think. And it did include a PDF to be fair, but I was like, oof, a little bit. But you're right, it is such a beautiful book. Like the intricate design of like simply like eldritch or arcane sigils on the thing. And like I really like the title of it, like the font of it. Like it stands out a little bit. But I will say it is a bit dark, so maybe it wouldn't stand out too much on your shelf compared to say, I don't know, Morkborg, which is I appreciate that is yellow, but it's like where's my Candela Obscura book of tome? But it
Yeah,
feels like a prop that you'd use. It would feel like a prop that you use in a game. You know what I mean? Like it
yeah,
feels like a you do it, yeah, like as a prop that so if you're doing a live stream or if you're in person, it looks part of the set rather than going, all right, get the D&D rule book out and then all that sort of thing. So it does look
that
as
is
if it's
true.
supposed to be
It
there.
does not look like a rule book. It looks like a very just looks like a fancy book and illustrations and stuff, which you can
Mm,
sort of vaguely see
yeah, yeah, yeah.
there.
Yeah, this illustration, the artwork is great. I really
So
like
it's
the
very, and I
artwork.
do feel like, even though I've just said it's a tad overproduced for its price point, but I do feel like I could probably get quite a lot of game out of this. Like it's definitely designed in
Mm,
a more one shot, episodic manner, but there's
yeah.
quite a lot going on in here. So that was just my
hmm
tiny little caveat, just being like, wow, it's expensive for a
yeah, I
single
think
shot
like
system.
yeah, I seem to remember as well the reason I had to get the this physical copy of it because that was the only way I could get a PDF copy. I think you can now get PDF copies on Drive for RPG because that's where I mostly read my books as well. So it's slightly cheaper there. But yeah, at the time when this first came out, for a good while, you just had to get the physical book. And I'm never a big fan of like, pre-order, get the physical book, and you get the PDF for free now. And I'm like, no, just give me the PDF now because what will happen is that I'll read the PDF and go, this is really good. I want a physical copy. That's how it works. I think you make more money through that way. But yeah, I agree with you. It's a nice book, but if I had the choice of getting the PDF, I would prefer that. And I'd say as well with the quick start PDF as well. What I liked about that was that it had the same cover, but it was like almost torn a little bit to indicate that it wasn't like ready. It's like you ripped this from somewhere and looking at it. So I was like, oh, that's quite
Okay.
exciting that they've done that deliberately on their front cover of the quick start, which I think you can still get somewhere as well. Um,
I'm
yeah,
go-
it felt very evocative to being in the world of
yeah.
Candle Obscura.
I'm going to have to add here though, because you may not have noticed this. I actually bought mine
Mm.
from my friendly local game store because it was
Oh yeah.
cheaper to do that, and also
hmm
it was cheaper there, and also I get a discount there. Um,
Yes, fair.
so I was like, yeah, I'll do that. Doesn't come with a PDF. Only comes with a PDF.
Oh, did it?
Only
Oh.
comes with a PDF if you order it online. So if you buy
Yeah.
a physical copy from a non-Critical Role backed store, you don't get the PDF with it. And that's the only
Oh,
time in years that I've bought a book that didn't come with a free PDF.
that's interesting because I feel that's a big accessibility thing
It's
for
an odd
me is
choice,
having
yeah.
like and again maybe like you said like maybe it's not because it's not a critical role backed like hey we sell critical role stuff like I know there's only a couple of those in the UK but yeah I'm always a big fan of like if you're able to get get the book and then give us your email and then send you the PDF straight away because that's just so you can have it. It's just so important and then be able to share it with your players easily rather than everyone crowding out around one book. you know.
Yeah.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, it'd be nice if there was some way. Well, there are ways around that, but it'd be nice if there was a legit way around that.
hmm
Because it
hmm
just feels like I've clearly bought the actual book. Just can I
Yeah.
email Matt Mercer and just say just send me a PDF?
And the other thing, just again, I'm quickly looking through it, and maybe you'll tell me otherwise. It doesn't seem to be usually in these books. They usually have a back page which has the character sheet or
Hmm.
the circle sheet or that. Doesn't have it in this book, so you'd have to download those anyway as a free resource. Always, they always have that. But as I had a quick look at my ones, and they may have changed. Again, it's a little bit as well. Those aren't form fillable. They're just pages. So then I'd have to scroll on it in like Paint or something like that. Like, and then so that means for you as a GM, you might have to then create character sheets in like Google Excel or something like that to as a like a character tracker, which people have done, and there's no problem with that. But that's a little bit extra work, another little tiny barrier to playing online or something like that. It's I'm always a big fan of like it comes with character sheets which are form fillable, and I can't even see any character sheets or
No,
a
they're
image
not
that
in
you
the
could
book.
photocopy at the back.
I looked as well, and there's no character sheets
Mm.
in the book or template for them or anything. But yeah, they are available free on
Yeah.
the website, and but as you say, not form fillable. They are on Roll20, so they are sort of automatically
So yeah,
uploaded there, so you
you
can
can
do
have that.
the
Yeah.
form fillable bits there that you need to do.
Hmm.
I will say, however, about I did want to touch a torsion production value. I did want to talk about the character sheets. This is sort of a design question as well. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so the game has, for anyone unfamiliar, I'm just gonna, well, I'm not gonna break down the game in full here. I'm just gonna pick on one particular mechanic. So there's a mechanic called drive, which is
Mm-hmm.
essentially skill specific luck. So you can spend drive to have extra dice rolls. And it's
Yes.
basically, well, I'm really good at this. It's basically the luck from D&D, but I'm really good at this one specific skill, so I can do it more in this skill than I can in other
Yeah.
skills. And you spend your drive.
Mm-hmm.
And physically, on pen and paper, that is a little shaded bar that you're
Yeah.
then required to rub out and then shade back in when you get it back and rub out when you shade back in. And that is horrible design. I hate that
Yeah.
because
It
that is going to
needs to
ruin
be the
your
other way
character
around.
sheet completely.
You
You,
need to do it the other way round. Absolutely.
just
Yeah.
the idea of having to constantly rub out and shade things in over and over again on a character sheet is just going to destroy your character sheet. Like character sheets take a
Mm-hmm.
beating at the best of times, but wanting your players
You
to
lose them.
continually have to make marks and
Mm-hmm.
like multiple times every single session you will be rubbing these things out
Mm-hmm.
or shading them in, and I think that's going to have more wear and tear on the character sheets than they have
Mm.
play tested.
Yeah, I agree. Because again, how I would solve this with like it would either just be like you have, like for example, I'm looking at a pre-gen character sheet of like a slink criminal in cunning. So out of the three sort of stats as nerve, cunning, intuition, they have six in drive. So that's the amount you could spend. I would just have that as like a tick box, or literally like six, and then you just
Yeah.
five, and type it like that, just to make it easier on yourself. I will say as well, just looking at the character sheets, I appreciate you don't have it up as well. I do think it's a very oddly it feels like it's more design over function, which I've not got a problem with per se. It just feels a bit like the way it describes drives, it's got them in like three sets of three, but then it doesn't indicate what like at a glance what that does. Like it doesn't tell you on these character on these pre-generated, oh drives do this. Normally on like starter set or quick start things, it has a little box that tells you what they do and what they're for. I don't know, even I hadn't, I know what I've looked at it before in the past and stuff, but I was like, yeah, at a glance as a player brand new to the system, I'd be like, well, what does like, and you can't tell, like I can only tell there's six in cunning for this particular character sheet because I know what the boxes at the bottom mean of each sort of like little box,
Right.
and that's how you indicate how much you have in a certain thing. Like in this character sheet, I've got three in nerve, six in cunning, and a nothing in intuition. But off the top, if I wasn't used to like running games and stuff like that, I'd have no idea what that meant as a
Right.
player, and I just need it needs to be as easy as possible. So I agree. Either like a number, like you have five drives in cunning, which you can spend on sway, read, and ride. That's you just I don't know. You need to visually see it, right? And I do think like it looks very pretty, but it doesn't work for me personally.
No, yeah. I mean, mechanically, I'm happy with it, but it's just like, yeah, like we say, the design on the character sheet is, I don't like it. It's important to
Well, there you
note
go. But
to
then
anybody who watches this that neither of us have actually played the game yet.
yes. Oh yeah. This is I think, and that this is very important as well. Like I appreciate anything I say. Again, it's been a long time since I've read the quick start. I haven't played it, but I do. There are questions where I'm like, this is what I would have as a player, who would then go to probably you, Christine, and go like, right, so what does this mean? And if you go, I can't find that within 30 seconds of me reading up in the book, as not necessarily good. As
Anyway,
you said, we've not
what
played it, so who
we've not
knows
played
what
it, but what
what
we're
we're talking
saying is
about.
that the character sheet might have used a couple more passes before it went to print.
I think so. Even just like because the other thing as well, if I'm looking at it on my Adobe Reader just now. I think this sheet is okay. It is like screen readable as well. But again, the drives, like they don't come up as like you have three drives and nerve. It just says drives and a max. It doesn't tell you what you've got. So I'm like, there needs to be alt text. There needs to be a like a verbal, a text version of it where you can read out. Because that's the thing I always find is that if often people use their images to describe their character sheets, which is fine, but if you've got a visual impairment, you're going to need to have the character sheet or even the book as in another form. So yeah, instantly I'm just like, oh, I don't think I'd be able to read that if I had a visual impairment, I would not be able to read this character sheet at all. Would you actually say this is from the people that are behind Critical Role? If you were advertising this to a bunch of players you were getting into RPGs?
I mean, they are. So I don't know what their sort of thinking is. Obviously, they've got Darrington Press, so they
Yes,
kind
so
of
that's
keep
that's
the
their arm of
name.
it. Yeah.
They kind of keep the name Critical Role off of most of their stuff, which is
Hmm.
interesting. Obviously, Darrington Press is like related to it, and Critical Role is one of the founding companies. It's listed in everything.
Yeah, I was gonna say the
Um,
credits have them. Yeah. Hmm.
but I think that is possibly the push. I'm posting on Start Playing. I'm just posting a Candela just today. Just posted a Candela Obscura weekly um,
Hmm.
campaign template.
Hmm.
Because I would have posted it sooner, but I hadn't read the book yet. I've been reading the book over the last week.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So yeah, and I think that's going to be there's it's going to be easier to migrate. I think hardcore D&D people, a significant number of whom have come from Critical Role, over to
Hmm.
Candela Obscura, than have
Yes.
me try and talk them into playing Fate or something
Hmm.
more
Agreed.
abstract. Which, although this is a relatively significantly more abstracted system to D&D. I think
Mm.
it's going to be a shock to the system for D&D players.
Mm.
But I do think that there is definitely it would be well, I don't know, definitely that's a big word, but it does
Yeah.
feel like it will be slightly easier as a jumping off point to be like, why don't we try the
Mm.
Critical Role system,
Hmm.
um,
Yeah.
and hopefully
That,
sort of people into the larger hobby.
yeah, I agree with that because I know there's that fear which I know you do not have and I don't have it either anymore. But having the people go, oh well, this is you're not Matt Mercer. This is not how I imagine DD because it's the Critical Role. I've seen them play Candela Obscura. This is not the same thing. Because I do think my initial impression of Candela Obscura is that it was a system designed for live streaming and content per se for that sort of storytelling rather than say home games, which I don't think is a problem at all. But I think what I find that really interesting, and the same with Daggerheart as well. I think to an extent, I think they're trying to make RPGs that are easy for people to pick up and role play and get into it. But then that transition to like online content and streaming, should you want to get into that, I think you'd want to use a system like this perhaps because you've got a decent setting, you've got easy enough rules as long as you explain what they are possibly to a new audience. But it doesn't get necessarily bogged down in like as you were saying before, like D&D is a combat system. So then suddenly like, okay, we're going to spend at least an hour working out, hitting points of these mooks before we go into the big bad. So I don't know if I would. I think yeah, it's a Darrington Press. It doesn't say anything about Critical Role, but I definitely wouldn't say to someone like, hey, do you want to play the Critical Roles Candela Obscura? Like, oh, do you want to try this Candela Obscura game? It's a horror role playing game that's sort of set in like an Edwardian Blades in the Dark kind of setting. That's how I'd sell it rather than put the brand on it, if you see what I mean.
Sure, no, I get you. I do think that, and I've said it in previous videos that Critical Role, whilst it brought a lot of people into the hobby, it brought a lot of people
Mm,
with a somewhat false impression of what D&D is, because obviously it's this group of voice
100%.
actors who are heavily acting and playing up the narrative side of games. So when I was reading Candela
Hmm.
Obscura, I was like, oh yeah, this seems like you said, it's much more streaming friendly, performance
Hmm.
friendly, and
Yes,
it feels like
correct.
much more of a game that sort of fits their play style.
Hmm.
Even
Hmm.
though like I said, I do think that they are relatively true to D&D. I think they are relatively like they do
Yeah.
obviously
Oh,
do want to
yeah.
play D&D.
Yeah, I
Sorry, what's
agree. I agree.
just that. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think that people who are like expecting this kind of narrative experience, if they migrate into games like this more, they might find
Hmm.
that a little bit more palatable.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
if like if you watch Critical Role and then went into the hobby not expecting as much math as you've been required to do, then you're like, oh, I wasn't
Yeah.
expecting homework.
Yeah.
Then
Like
this will be
yeah,
your
I
game
could
for you.
Yeah, definitely, because there's certainly the main mechanic of everything is literally a dice pool of d6s. Look for the highest number. Is it a six? Congratulations, you have succeeded. And then not multiple sixes, you've got a critical success. And that sort of tiered successes, I think, is just easily translated rather than going, does a 15 do it? Which is such an abstracted number in all things. And yet, like I said, you don't have to worry about maths. You don't worry about getting things wrong because ultimately the main mechanic is just rolling a d6 and highest number wins, which I always think is that any mechanic like that, and then you build up from that. I always think is like the easiest way to get people in. And also, I'm always a big fan of people using d6s because that is the most common die. Like I love a good d12 and all the thing. Don't get me wrong, but like again, it's that just breaking down the barriers to people because people have seen d6s. They probably got them in their Monopoly sets they don't use anymore. So it's like, what's the easiest like way to progress and stuff like that? Let's just get d6s. Let's just make it simple and don't worry, I will help you. The only hard bit is like turning up and maybe doing a little bit of role playing should you need to. And I think that's sort of the basic level of it. I think works for me.
Yeah.
The system.
I do find it interesting how many systems front load the players with the information on what they need to roll, whilst D&D doesn't. D&D is like 17. Is that good? You sort of have to wait and find out. Whereas like a lot of the systems are kind of like, well, you need at least a 7, or if you get more than 12, then you're doing amazingly. And like for players sort of know, like even in Fate, you tell your players generally in advance what they're trying to get, so that they can be like, okay, well, we can't make that. We need to do this, this, and this to prepare ourselves so that we can get a bigger, so that we can prepare for it. Whereas D&D is very much luck of the roll. Which sort of like the more you play other systems, the more that luck of the roll thing kind of makes me go, oh, is this bad design?
Like Powered by the Apocalypse is like there's so many versions of it and hacks of it now because it is just simply like below a 6 is a miss, 7 to 9 is a mixed success, 10 plus is success, 12 plus super success, and often they'll have like their various moves and stuff like that, which I won't go into detail, but it will tell you like, oh, on a 7 to 9 you get what you wanted, but it's not quite. There's a complication. The GM will tell you what it is. Like it writes down what the consequences is, so you can look at it going, I know what it is straight away. Like you don't have to be like you said, like you don't have to be guessing like is 15 enough, is 17 enough, because then the GM. I do think there's pressure on the GM to be like, oh, fine. It is. It is this. Like I think there's more pressure to fudge rolls, whereas it certainly in Powered by Apocalypse and here as well, it writes out exactly what the outcome is. So you can't wheedle your way out of it unless you're going to go, oh, I got a 4 or 5. I'm going to spend a drive to roll another dice, or I don't want that whatever happens to me, I'm going to use a resistance instead. I think it puts it in clear terms of what you, the player, have at your not command, but like have at your fingertips. It's not like, oh god, now what do I do? You're constantly having to think like, what next? Okay, and then especially if you're a new player, certainly to D&D, like I might have told you a story before. Like when I first started D&D, I did not realize when I rolled like an attack, I had to add something to my attack. So for ages, I was like, God, I'm never hitting anything. How are people hitting things? And it's because no one told me that I had a to hit modifier, and I thought it was the first 6 months of my D&D career was just not hitting anything. And here I'm like, oh, I don't need to add anything. It's just the amount of dice I have in my hand, which I just think is just because that's more. It feels like individual and special, perhaps, that you will be better at this because you have more chance of succeeding rather than like you got a +1, which is like a nebulous abstract number to something which you just so happen to be really good at. You really kick down that door with a 21, or something.
Yeah, and you're still capable of the the lows and the highs, because in like say D&D, a really high roll is memorable and a really low roll is memorable, but most of your rolls are sort of in that middle zone of just being just sort of boring. Like, oh, I missed by 1. Okay, well, that wasn't exciting in any way whatsoever. I just missed by 1.
That's also gutting, isn't it? Yeah, it's also gutting when you miss it by 1. You're like, oh.
But since we're talking about dice, I do quite like the dice system as proposed in Candela Obscura. And I'm going to say that in contrast to, I watched the Daggerheart video about their 2d12 system, and I was like, I don't think I like this. I'm really not sure about this funny 2d12 and but the d12s mean different things. Each one has a different purpose depending on which one. You can succeed with hope or succeed with despair, and there's different effects. I'm kind of like, I was kind of watching the video like, this seems a bit convoluted.
I think it is. I think to be fair to them, like I do like that they're using D12s for sure. And I think as with all things, like it could be stripped back. So the Hope and Despair is more of a flavoursome thing. Like I was looking at something recently, which was like the Dust City Outlaws, which also had a complicated like in a dice mechanic. But then it's like, oh, but you could also add challenge dice and advantage dice, which give you a boon or despair. And I was like, oh, what does that do? Because wait, it just flavours the outcome. I was like, well, I'm not rolling extra dice that will happen to. Yeah, I can tell you, you've succeeded but with a cost. I will tell you that's probably going to be a challenge. Like I can decide as a GM what this. I don't need to add more dice to the mix which have a flavoursome thing. So yeah, I'm a big fan of just keeping it simple. Like I don't mind the 2d12 hope and despair stuff, but it does feel like it's meant for GMs who have never come across that sort of like with a mixed result or with a like theming it in some way. Rather, it feels like before maybe they've only just done like you said before, like black and white. They succeed, they fail. There's
Mm,
nothing in between. So maybe that's what they're trying to do there. But yeah, I don't mind that too much. But I agree. Like I think compared to this system, their first game, I'm just like, yeah, six
yeah.
is highest. Great, you succeeded. The
And
end. You
and
don't need to worry about anything else.
like you say, I can comprehend wanting to chuck the more dice I can chuck, the better I will probably do. I can get, and yeah, that's just pure gamer logic. For like, I just want to chuck a big
Oh,
handful of dice if I can.
yeah. Yeah.
Um,
You want to do it, and then just do it once. You don't need to have advantage. We're not trying to kick down the same door in Baldur's Gate and just spending your inspiration. Like you're desperate to do this one thing and see what's in this chest, and you're like, oh, just end it. Just this door's open.
uh, but yeah, no, I can get behind that. And we've mentioned powered by the apocalypse. This is what they're calling the illuminated world system, but it's
Yeah,
it's
I've
it's
not heard of
powered
this
by the
system
apocalypse
before.
adjacent.
That's what
let's
I
let's
that's what
let's be
I
honest.
gathered. Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Which is again, there's no problem with that. Like all D6 type systems, they're all similar in certain respects, and that no one person has a copyright on the tiers of success thing. I guess from you, I'm just thinking out loud. Like, what drew you to pick it up other than like because I feel like to me, if someone talked to me about Candela Obscura without saying like anything about it other than this, I would be like, well, why don't you play Blades in the Dark, or why don't you play like Call of Cthulhu, or maybe that's a question much later, perhaps. But that's the thing for me as someone who's read a lot of games. I'm like, has this not already been done before? What makes it so stand out?
well, that's kind of a thing. I mean, in terms of the setting, is
Mm.
I started looking into it. I only started looking. I was aware of it, but I only started looking into it because I saw that this event, Candela Obscura
Hmm.
Week, was coming up. I thought, well, I'll have a look,
Hmm.
and if it interests me, then I'll try and do a thing about
Yeah.
it. Um,
Hmm.
and it is, yeah, it is very sort of high magic Call of Cthulhu
Hmm.
esque, Blaze in the Dark, Monsters of the Week kind of vibe to it. So
Hmm.
it's not offering a huge amount that's new. It's obviously a variant system. So
Hmm.
yeah, I definitely can understand that. But I think it's almost like, so unsurprisingly, in retrospect, at least half of
Hmm.
this book is lore, just world building and
It's
lore.
its own setting for sure.
It's
Yeah.
a book, made by writers, which is, I imagine, is Matt Mercer's contribution, because he is a big kind of writer in that regards of like
Yeah, game writer
the
and stuff.
lore of Exandria is impressively dense.
Well, there's several books on
Um,
it now, so yeah.
so like the lore alone is that section. Let me point at the camera.
Right in the middle, isn't
That's
it? Yeah.
nothing but lore. There's no game in here in that middle
Yeah.
section. That's nothing but lore and
just
setting.
just oh just under 100 pages.
Yeah,
I can see here, which is great. I mean, again, if you're somebody who's not fussed about the setting, sorry, if you're not fussed about the game mechanics, but you're really interested in finding new settings, because I used to be someone that just cared about like, oh, I want to try a new system because of the mechanics, but now I'm like, oh, is the setting interesting? Well,
yeah,
then maybe I would like to use the setting elsewhere. So that's the thing I thought as well. It's like, why wouldn't I use the setting but use Blades in the Dark instead? Or use it Call of Cthulhu instead, because I prefer those games. And I think probably you could do that. There's obviously some changes you'd have to do with like, because like you have with this game, you have this like the circle, which is their sort of like way of doing your group, right? Is
mm,
that you answer questions and stuff. So it's similar to your lair or your group in Blades in the Dark and stuff like that. So again, I would just switch those around, but then still have the similar setting per se.
yeah.
So I it's a good, it's an interesting setting, but I do feel like maybe I've come in at the wrong end because I've read Call of Cthulhu, I've read Cult, Divinity Lost, all that sort of thing, and now I'm like, this is nice, but it's not dark enough. It needs to be
Definitely darker than that.
grimy. But
But
maybe it's more of
there's
a Disney-fied new audience, American audience vibe. Like when they changed the ending of films because the American audiences didn't test well against the bad endings. That's why I wonder if it's like this for this book.
potentially. But yeah,
Mm.
but to answer your question, I think what appealed to
Mm.
me is the fact that it is very heavy in that area, and like the
Mm.
mechanics, um, it does do often draw me to a game. It's one of the it's primary reason I
Yeah.
think I like Vampire the Masquerade is because of the mechanics. I know people
Mm.
love that setting, but I don't necessarily love that setting. But just the mechanics
Mm.
of it, I really find that
The
game
World of Darkness
intriguing.
stuff. Yeah. Great.
Um,
Agreed. Yeah.
but the fact that this had such kind of a dense world lore to it, and it is really interesting. I do think it's quite well written. That was kind of
Hmm.
like, oh yeah, I could enjoy that just as
Hmm.
as a book essentially, and I could
Hmm.
definitely build off of that the concepts
Hmm.
that are tied in there, and I think it's just
Hmm.
it's just unique enough that it has interesting. Uh, it's just unique enough that I think it kind of justified itself to
Yeah.
me.
I think I always find games that put themselves in that sort of turn of the century because that's what it sort of sells it on. It's like turn of the century, so you don't have modern technology, but there's supernatural, there's science, that sort of like a phenomena going on. But I, I just because I've hit on the page here, which talks about like the time period being, it starts in 1907. Got a beautiful like map like of the place, which is gorgeous. But then it just says what doesn't exist here is obviously racism, homophobia, transphobia, other forms of prejudice, which I obviously absolutely agree with. But I do feel like maybe there's this nostalgia looking at like, oh, turn of the century, steampunk. Oh, isn't it so great? And you're like, you're okay to have stories that involve this stuff in. Like, but it's not the focus of this. So I think I don't mind. Again, I'm trying to tread on careful territory here, but like I do feel like you can have stories that involve these certain things, as long as everyone at the table is okay with it, perhaps. But I always think anything about turn of the century, there's always a little bit of me going, it wasn't great turn of the century. That realistic. So it just always feels like we're putting on like rose tinted glasses to look at this sort of stuff, and maybe it's a very American thing as well. Going, gosh, the new world, haha, and you're like, yeah, yeah, I don't know. So that's the only thing I thought is like anything industrial, because that's why I quite liked Vaesen, for example, because it kind of acknowledges that the big conflict is then this new industrialization thing going against the traditions of the countryside and the Fae, and that's where the conflict is. So you don't have to obviously you wouldn't look at like racism or anything like that, but that's where it recognizes conflict. Where I feel like here the conflict is like, oh, the world's like weave or whatever is thinning and the bad things are coming through, and I'm like, that's not that's just a that feels like an environmental thing. I don't know. I think it's not deep enough as a story. Like I don't feel the hook of it. Do you see what I mean? Maybe I'm not making sense
No,
in
no, no, it's
that
making
way,
sense.
but
It's making sense.
yeah. I don't know. I said, I feel like I've seen many turn of the century books, and then it's like, aha, everything's great, and the new world, and I'm like that's why I feel like stuff like Wizard of Oz and Wicked works really well, which I appreciate. It's a complete tangent, but it's like everyone has these green glasses about how wonderful it is, but actually it's a really bad place because there's oppression, there's like discrimination of certain types, and I don't mind having stories about that, but I think yeah, it needs to be put sensitively, and maybe they're just like, don't worry about it. I don't know.
Yeah, there is. I did say when I did think when I was reading through it, at the risk of sounding like anti-woke, they do hammer it home a little hard and be like, be nice, and then like the next chapter starts with like, remember to be nice and don't be racist. And like, okay, I remember from the first. Then a few chapters later, like, now this game contains no racism. Like you say, it literally says that in the game. I'm like, okay, I okay, I wasn't going to include those things anyway, but like you telling me not to is I'm kind of annoying now.
I
And
think they've worked really hard on that. Yeah.
yeah,
Sorry, go on.
they've just sort of they overdid it just like a tiny bit, and you always
Hmm.
see like the the actual anti-work argument, the people who speak out against safety tools, always speak out against them as if they're being forced to use them. It's like, well, no, no, you're not
I
being
know.
forced to use safety tools. They're for the benefit of people who might need them. If your table
Yeah.
doesn't need them, great. You're a bunch of friends who are going to
Wow,
drink
you
some
must know your friends
beers
so well.
and
Yeah.
just like but that's fine. But like, it's not, no one's forcing you to do these things.
Yeah.
Um,
Y-
and it's
Yeah.
important that
I'm
they
obviously
included it. And like the first time, like, they did
yes,
like a first
absolutely.
opening chapter on it, and I was like, oh, good, this is all
Yes.
here.
Which
But like
was
you
good,
say,
yeah.
it keeps being repeated, and it's kind of like, I got it the first time.
I think, yeah, I'm always a big fan, like you said, of safety tools like being mentioned, but you don't make a big deal about it because as soon as you make a big deal about something, as you say, people go, I know this, and it'd be forced upon us. And I think it's a skill. Don't get me wrong. I think it's an absolute skill to write really concise copy about stuff and have like links to things. Like I'm always a big fan when a book goes, yeah, here's the lines and veils, here's open door policy, that's it. Anything else, check out the RPG safety tool stuff. But then the opposite way, the opposite sort of flip side of this, which I'll be interested to see your take on it. So there's other games out there who take like what I would say punish players if they break the rules. So for example, there's a game called Troubleshooters, which is like a Belgian comics s inspired. So you think of like Tintin, that sort of like like that sort of like adventure, heist, whatever. And it has a big rule about players can't kill characters. Like there's guns and stuff, but it always just misses. It's the mystery. It's like solving things. If players do kill someone on purpose, they are punished by it. They're like their points are taken away from them, and it's from the group as a collective. And I'm like, and it's written several times, and I'm like going like, surely a session zero saying, hey, the vibes of this game is there's no killing from players. If you've got a problem with that, we're not playing this game. I would never punish players like, oh, you broke the thing, because like it just felt like such a brutal way of like,
That
you know
is,
what I
yeah.
mean? Like,
I mean, I also think that it's somewhat amusing to have a game that is like, this game is PG rated. So then the DM has to always narrate somehow those NPCs
yeah.
survived. Like, oh, you threw them off the roof, but they landed in the passing truck full of
Yeah, they just
laundry or
disappear and
whatever.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And
Um,
the mist.
in
But
that
then there
kind
was
of,
another one.
PG way.
Yeah, but there was another one which again, somebody, if a player hurt somebody, then that most of their resources would be taken away from them. But then all the other players who basically stood back and let this happen get half their points docked for something. And I'm just there going like, I think you guys need a proper session zero. Like I'm not a fan of games that punish or like players like that. Just say this like again, this is going the opposite way to Candela Obscura is obviously saying, be nice, don't be an asshole. I get that. But then there's no rule in this where it goes, if you are an asshole, well, the ghosts eat you and you lose all your
Yeah.
points in nerve. I don't know. You're like it you don't need that. So yeah, I think it needs to be a fine balance with like stating what it is and then what happens if players don't want to play to that and facilitating like an open discussion about it and maybe they don't you don't have certain players at your table and that's a-okay because I feel like this you could play so many different kinds of stories using this system but everyone needs to be on the same page about it. Everyone needs to understand what the palette is. I'm a big fan when we do session zeros and stuff. We're like, what do you want to get out of this game? Like what you've read about it, and I give a quick description or a primer, and people are like, oh, well, I really want to discover more about the ghost, or oh, I really want to find a cool artifact, and that's just again just ways to get players interested and like do some world building as well. But equally, they could be like, oh, well, I don't like ghosts. They're my veil. And you're like, okay, so we're gonna maybe change what the story is, etc. So yeah, I'm always a big fan of opening those conversations up front, but like, yeah, hammering it home, whether it's via
Yeah.
be nice several times, or if you don't do this, you're going to lose all your points.
I guess it does appeal me to me because, like you say, it's reminiscent of all these other kinds of games. It is very, Call of Cthulhu and Blades in the Dark, and yeah, there's a. I'm very into Monster of the Week lately. That's kind of one of the game that I'm currently playing
Mm,
a lot of at the moment, and I really like it. And just
hmm.
structurally, it's similar kind of design. You have a group of players who are going out to fight a monster every session, which is
Hmm.
structurally basically the same thing, just obviously a very different setting, opposed to the modern world settings. Is a um,
Hmm.
fantasy setting that has allusions to being steampunk, but didn't like want to go full steampunk, because
Yes.
I
Yeah,
guess they
yeah,
thought that was a little bit too close to Blades or whatever.
Yeah. One thing I do like with the like it feels very slimmed down in terms of like because the thing with Call of Cthulhu is that obviously you can there's so many specialities of like oh you are a scholar and it's just a bit more intense. But here you have like there's roles and specialities. There's 5 roles and then there's 2 subclasses or specialities that are linked to that, and it's just like that's it. You don't ever have to worry about like lots of extra things that you're going to level up and get all these fixes. I think that's again just makes it clearer in terms of like character creation that you will fit into these broad archetypes of stuff like yeah face, muscle, scholar, slink, and weird, which
Mm.
is always a great role. If you look round your group and nobody else is weird, you're the weird person. That's what I imagine in this character creation. But yeah, and each of them have their a speciality, but I think they seem that you can interpret them quite a variety of stuff. So you're not going to be locked into being like, I am a paladin of this particular faith, etc. You know, you've got for the face, you've got journalist and magician, 2 roles that I wouldn't, or 2 subclasses I wouldn't necessarily associate with the face of a group. But then it makes sense, right? That you know, you're a journalist writing stuff or a magician, some sort of performer perhaps that can do like little bits of magic. So yeah, I quite like that sort of like simplification of like here and they're not like over the top naming things either. It just keeps it straight in the sense of like it's relatable terms. I think that you can see in a grounded, it's grounded in this reality.
Yeah, and like a lot of similar kind of character creation designs, there's still a fair bit of variability in there. You've got like stuff to play with
Mm.
on character creation to specialize your character in
Mm-hmm.
quite specific ways, and some of the powers quite thing. Like all the D&D has a lot of character options, but once you pick one,
Mm-hmm.
you're just sort of stuck with it. It's like
Yeah.
it only really does one thing, and then eventually you pick a
Mm-hmm.
subclass, but that subclass only really does one thing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so you can't like it's hard to vary your character. Whereas I feel like
Yeah.
systems like this have a little bit more. Well, I want to be really good at my cunning. I want to put everything into all my cunning skills, or I want to like
Mm-hmm.
take these specific kind of specialities.
Mm-hmm.
And I like
Mm-hmm.
that they
Yeah.
have the illumination keys, which is
Mm.
so similar to um, Monster of the Week and other those kinds of other systems. You have like a little handful of questions that you ask at the end of a session, and it basically determines how much experience you get. But experience is a group thing, so you don't get experience. You get
Mm.
experience for your team, which I quite like.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if that's been used somewhere else, or I'm just forgetting it. Um, which you then kind of collectively kind of get to spend.
Mm.
But I like the illumination keys as did you do these? As one of the questions is did you do one or more of your illumination keys? And they kind of just 3 little
Mm.
phrases at the bottom of each character sheet that vaguely determine how you might play your character, or like how your character
Mm.
might perform in some way. Because if you do them, you're more
Yeah.
likely to get a little bit of extra experience. But they're not mandatory. It's only a thing, and you get one
Mm.
experience. I think it's one experience regardless of how many of them you do, whether you do one or all 3.
Yeah.
So you're not
Yeah. Because
locked
yeah,
into
can you
them.
imagine? Yeah, because I can imagine if you were like, yeah, if you were playing like the slink criminal, and here you've got like do something illegal, make a deal, stand up to authority. Like it might be unlikely that you could do all 3 in one session or in a story arc or whatever, just depending on what you're running as. So yeah, I like that these are optional things that you get 1 point for. So yeah, I like that, and yeah, I think that they're also straightforward, and they're just like two or 3 words, a phrase. Did you do this? Rather than like a long like sometimes you have questions like I know they've got some other like when we do Powered by the Apocalypse stuff, it's always like, did you uh subvert an authority figure? Did you reveal something from your past? Which is more again, it's a bit more fluid, but I just think here's just straightforward, just straight to the point. Did you do something illegal? And
Yeah.
you're like, yes.
My favourite
I did.
one is on the occultist, which one of their keys is act bizarre. Did you act bizarre this session? Yes, I did.
Yeah, I like that. Collect oddities as well for that one. I think that's great. And oh, a medium as well from the weird. You like connect with someone, sense phenomena, make a scene. I mean, instantly I'm like, well, that's it.
I
I
could do
wonder if
that.
they're putting any sort of order, but which one you can do that, which is the easiest to hardest that you do, and like make a scene. I'm like, okay, I can do that easily. I do like the track it's got as well, like it's sort of circular around like a candle sort of thing. It's quite different to like having it as a line or just like marking XP
Mm.
and stuff. I just think that's quite interesting. different way of illustrating it.
Yeah, yeah. And then you
Mm.
get your bonuses are more, or at least somewhat, about your things you can do as a group, which is again,
Mm.
I think is neat. Creating,
Yeah.
I think the group power and the group abilities, and also the end of session stuff, the where you spend points to do one of the three end of session things that you can do, which is there's
Hmm.
like basically they are healing, training, and what was the other one? There's healing, training. Oh, and getting your drives back. I can't remember what the word for that is, but you can
Is it
do
just like resting or something?
yeah, but you've only got a limited number of them as a whole group.
Right.
So
Hmm.
you can't take the time to do early on. You might be fine to do whatever, but if you're running out of like slots for healing, you're like, oh well, only two of us
Hmm.
can heal at the end of this session because we haven't got enough
Mm.
things left. Um, our resources are running low because it feels like they kind of represent
Mm.
your resources and contacts and stuff. So
Oh,
I think
nice.
that's a neat idea that takes
Mm. Oh, I like that.
yeah,
Yeah, because then it get you engage with each other. I'm like, okay, and little bit more active listening, and people are like, yeah, yeah, I can do. Don't worry, I don't need to be healed. You know, you take it, it's fine, and actually engage with what's going around the table with other people on a very basic level. Because I think sometimes people, again, we've all been guilty of not listening in to a very important scene, and then later on you're like, oh, I bet something really important came up, and I should have noted that down, or that person's, I didn't hear that person was down in combat, and now they're on their second death saving throw, and I could have gone and helped them and all that sort of thing. So I think, yeah, anything which is to do with like building up characters and that character development, and also like healing and stuff like that. If everyone's involved in that way, it's not like a individual thing. I think it just engages with you in the system itself, but also engages you with the other players around the table.
yeah. And there's a lot of mechanics around sort of working together and helping each other and
Mm.
outside of just that one kind of group power that you have,
Hmm.
it is quite useful and powerful. But there's the
So,
mechanics around working together. It does feel like it's designed like for a team. Um,
yeah,
Whereas like
that's
when was the
interesting.
last time you took the help action in D&D? I mean, you just
Well,
don't.
that's what I was going to ask because like so again, just because I can't find it off the top of my head. So when you are helping someone with a roll, do they get just an extra die to their pool, or do you roll as well?
You can spend your drive to give them extra dice, is my
Oh,
understanding.
so you. Oh, interesting.
So you
Okay,
can be
because yeah,
like,
because
well,
I feel
I'm good
like
at this. That person has to make a roll, but I'm really good at it, so I can like coach them or whatever.
that's. Oh, I like that. I do like that. Rather than yeah, that you still have to spend something. You can't just be like, I'm also here. It's like, and it's like, well, I'm helping. You know, so because then you either have like someone that gets lots of dice who will just succeed just through sheer force of will,
Yeah,
or everyone else is rolling. Like I God, the amount of times they've gone, let's all do perception checks, or let's all do an investigation check around this room, and I had to go, no, this is not Baldur's Gate 3. One of you will do it, and with advantage, and you can pick whoever it is. Like don't and you will get the same results no matter what. Like because especially when you know that in the room there's nothing there, and they think, oh, but if we roll high enough, there will be something there. Whereas I feel like yeah, spending something that you're giving some of your resources up, that's again. I think that's quite special because you might need that resource later on. So you're willing to spend it now to see if they can gain something that will help them later on, rather than just waiting and then possibly helping yourself out with your own role. I quite like that as a mechanic.
yeah. Um, and I like that it's quite succinct in terms of the advice it's given. Like there's doesn't. I mean,
Mm.
there is a GM section, but
Yes.
realistically, there's nothing secret there. It's all just this kind of like how the. Whereas like in I guess Monster of the Week, I keep coming back to, partly because it's sat on the desk
No.
next to me. I can see it because I'm literally just running it earlier today. Um, the GM section's out. It's kind of like, well, I think the players are better off not reading that because it's just a little
Mm.
bit of a glimpse behind the curtain.
Hmm.
Whereas I think this is tight enough that it's fine. There's no, you don't lose anything by understanding what's going on behind the scenes necessarily.
Hmm. Interesting.
Other than potentially like monster stuff and things that are in the scenarios.
Yeah. I guess then would you say that it feels like the running the game section is written so that if a player just decided to read through the whole book, that they could read it and go, oh, actually, I could run this game as well. 'Cause sometimes I do think like these books, like certainly like Powered by the Apocalypse, so they obviously have player principles and then GM principles. But then if you read them, really, you're like these are kind of the same, except the GM one is like you facilitate stuff, and here's how easy it is. So yeah, do you think this book is written for just all players to read through, and then eventually they'll like try to become a GM?
I do. I think because it's a narrative-driven game, that
Yeah.
it's I think it's a little bit more narrative-driven than say Monster of the Week maybe,
Hmm.
because I think it encourages creative choices from players. In
Hmm.
the same way that Fate does. Like I've been teaching Fate a little bit here and there at the moment. And the one thing I have to
Hmm.
say to the players, particularly because they're mostly coming from like D&D like systems, I have to say that I can't ask you for a skill roll because I don't know what skills you have. Like you don't, not everybody has that same list of
Yeah.
skills. You have a list of skills that you picked at character creation. So I can't say, give me an athletics check, and you're like, oh, well, I haven't got athletics. Like, oh, well,
Yeah.
you should. You need the players to say, well, this is the skill that I want to use
I
to
have.
do it
Yeah.
this way,
Yeah.
and it does encourage that. It's encouraging that style of play, which I prefer,
Yeah.
because it encourages creative decisions. Like, well, I'm bad at this, so I don't want to roll an attack. I don't want to make an attack roll because I'm bad at that. Can I try and make some other kind of roll to get through the situation in a different way because that's
Yeah.
what I'm good at. So encouraging players to play to their strengths, um,
Hmm.
which is kind of, as soon as I read that in the book, I was kind of like, okay, yeah, this is definitely a kind of my kind of system.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
but it is hard sometimes to get players, crunchy game players, into that mindset that they are allowed to think creatively, um, and find a way around a challenge that plays to their strengths. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
sometimes that
Yeah.
is just a bit tricky to get your head around. I think I don't know where I
I
was
I
going with
definitely
that,
and
but
no, no, no. It's interesting because I was playing RPGs before I went to do like improvs play, and I was actually inspired by RPGs to go and like go to some improv classes to be a better GM. And what I find is that that's you know the skills are transferable. Like, you know, be a good listener, be a good scene partner, build the world together, all that stuff is collaboration, all good stuff. But then improvisers, as soon as you give them uh, some rules, they get really worried that they're going to get stuff wrong. And similar with role players as well. Like they'll be like, "Oh, I need to look at this character sheet, and oh God, I can only do this." Like the worst thing you could do is get it wrong, and it's fine. Like I'm always like it's someone says to me, "Look, I've got this skill. I don't really know what it is, but it sounds like I can do this. So I'm going to try it with this thing." I'm like, "Amazing, roll for it." I'm not going to say like. Unless it's like something that I'm like, that is breaks the laws of physics of the world that we're in, or something like that. You know, like I'm always willing to work with people on it because it shows that they're trying to engage with what I've just said, rather than just like, yeah, I'm just gonna. I've already rolled a performance check. And you're like, what for? Why? I didn't. You have to tell me why you've rolled that. And then I go, you didn't need to roll that. I was going to give you the information anyway, but now I'm going to change it. You know, so I always think like, yeah, being able to get the system and use it as a jumping off point, as we've said before, but not being tied and not being punished by the rules when you get them wrong, or if you break them, like that's a different sort of thing. But yeah, I think any game that encourages you to like think outside the box and then encourage that, like ultimately that story, like, you know, we always go back to rule of cool, don't we? I think this is a lot of the story here could be rule of cool esque, as long as you go back to those core tenets of like, this is what your role is within the group. If you want to change that role, that's fine, but like, how does it change you as a person? Like, what have you seen and stuff like that? And when you have a quite rich setting, I do think it's like rich, and it's like, again, it's maybe not for me, but if I got into RPGs much later and just found this, I'd be like, oh, this is perfect, you know. So I think it's a good starting setting,
mm,
and maybe a good starting RPG if you want to just do horror. If you don't want, if people are like, oh, I don't want to run D&D for you, but maybe I can run Candela Obscura instead, you know, I think because that's the thing that I always ties to, because I think people obviously assume RPGs is D&D or RPGs is high fantasy. And if you're, I'm always a big fan of like, you don't need to start on a high fantasy game first. It could be any game, and then if you people are okay with horror and a bit of mystery, maybe this is one to try with people and see if they take to it quicker than they would do if they did D&D via then taking to it via D&D and coming
mm.
back around to doing narrative.
Yeah, and it does feel like a game born out of a love for that style. It's born out of,
Hmm.
it's a game written by people who love Blades in the Dark, who love Call of Cthulhu, who love, or, who clearly want to emulate those games. Not rip,
Hmm.
I'm not saying they're ripping them off. I'm just saying they clearly
No.
enjoy that style and that kind of setting, and they wanted to give their own spin on it, as all of us who homebrew always do. I mean,
Hmm.
literally, like any homebrewing DM or GM could probably create their own game if they really like knuckled down with a good copywriter and just kind of like put their ideas on
Yes.
paper. And that's kind of what
Hmm.
it feels like. Someone's like who's homebrewed the crap out of someone who played Call of Cthulhu and was like, well, this is fun, but I'd really like to play like an epic hero in this setting. And that's kind of
Mm.
then you get as opposed to somebody who might get killed by a brick falling brick off of a wall, or like the rats come jump out and bite his neck out.
Ah!
Um,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, you're very fragile in Call of Cthulhu. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, you can definitely see that it's made with a love of those games, and I would say the hope if this, if the Critical Role fans do migrate to this, that it would then migrate them further into exploring those
Mm.
games as well.
Yeah, that's my hope as well, is that people going into, like, obviously, like, we're in the 50th year of D&D. I'm hoping that next year, and like that people are, there's going to be bigger, maybe Critical Role will do more different sort of like systems, or at least support other publishers. Like they will become a proper publisher, maybe not their own systems, but bring others to the forefront and shine a light on those stories that aren't necessarily um, like American stories, but any part of the world, and using their systems as well. Like we've got so many that are out there, like Crow and Coyote, like just stories. But I just, yeah, I just think, like, I think it's a good start. A good start. B plus. This RPG, and I think Daggerheart is going to be that's their flagship for sure. Like, I kind of hope they still do Candle Obscura, and I know they do live shows and they do little mini series and stuff like that. But I kind of do hope they don't forget it in a couple of
Mm.
years' time, as like a sort of like, this is our first like way into it. Because as you said, the writing, I think it's good, and I think the setting is there. I think it is a good my first RPG for people who have watched a little bit of other stuff, who aren't necessarily who are narrative first rather than rules first. But I hope there'd be more. In the future they always talk about, like, will there be like an anthology book, or a way to adventures and modules and stuff like that, like D&D does as well. But maybe there'll be more of a community around it that would create like scenarios for your investigators to go find out, and is there an overarching mystery that you can tie into it. So I hope this like a good start for people to get excited about playing other games and start to write their own stuff.
Yeah, and I guess the horror genre is the easiest genre to insert homemade stuff in, because you'd be like, well, this week it's a werewolf, this week it's
Hmm.
the Loch Ness monster. You can just pluck any kind of villain out of the genre and just chuck them in,
Hmm. Hmm.
as opposed to like having to invent something complicated.
Yeah, yeah. I think like I'm a big fan of horror, and I love how that, like we were saying before, there's different degrees of it, and not everyone is a super horror fan, but you can add the uncanniness, the weirdness, and I think that goes really well with, obviously, the Victoriana and Edwardian thing, as long as it's not like. And like, obviously, Call of Cthulhu, that's the biggest sort of example of it. But again, like here, it doesn't talk. I know it has a big thing about like insanity and not using that as a game mechanic per se. It's like it's dealer's choice in the sense of like what the story is. But I agree. I think it's easiest thing to write for, perhaps, because then you just take, well, I find this scary, so other people find this scary. Maybe then you don't have to invent as much, I guess. Especially because you have like stuff like Nightmare Logic, where you just leave stuff unexplained and people go, "Oh, that was horrible. I don't know
Yeah,
why." You never have to justify it. Whereas high fantasy or action, you always have to have like, well, this was the big bad's like plan, and you're like, well, this makes no sense. You don't look at it too hard. Like, I've given you an enemy to fight.
yeah. I mean, the running the game section, the GM section, is barely 10 pages.
Hmm.
It's just mostly it's reiterating stuff that was in the front anyway. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
I do like the. I need to wrap up. I knew we were aiming to wrap up, but I do like the
It's okay.
design as well, the assignment structure, which again is similar to how they have it
Yes.
written in Monster of the Week. It's just how you design a one shot, just like step by step.
Perfect. Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
which again, it's just neat easy to follow design. It does feel like, like I think like you've kind of said, it does feel like baby's first guide to a horror RPG, which is, I don't mean, and
Mhm.
that's not a bad thing by any stretch. I think that's
No,
really good.
that's not that. Yeah, that's not a negative thing. I think. Yeah, I'm because I think certainly when I talk to people about horror games and stuff, people go, "Oh, but I don't want to be. I don't want a game where I'm stressed and scared. I want to have fun, and I want to be like, you will have fun. I promise. You just need to like this. This
Yeah,
is like yeah, because this particular game you can make it really eerie and weird, rather than full blown body horror things coming out the sea, etc. Like like one of my favorite horror games is Brindlewood Bay, which is you play. Basically, it's Murder She Wrote meets Eldritch Horror. You are
yeah,
old ladies from a book club. There's nothing scary about that, but I just love that idea that you're solving crimes, and then there's this big overall arching thing. So I think you can have a proper good time with this. I think that's my thing. I would love to see what kinds of like people you can have in the circle that aren't necessarily what I would assume is like the typical adventuring party. There's the golden girls of like paladin, the ranger, rogue, and like a wizard. I'd love to see like everyone is much older. They're not all like urchins or they're like, oh, I've just come to this town and we're investigators. I think I'd love to see random mundane, maybe older. Yeah, I'd like to see like grannies take on Candela Obscura. Like old women,
yeah.
maybe posh old women. Like, oh, Gertrude, no, don't go through the portal. And then try and work that in like that, just to make I guess a different spin on it, perhaps. Than maybe the sort of I don't know, like I said, like the traditional, like, oh, these are all very interesting individuals who I like a bit of the occult, and I've come to this auction to see if I can claim the book of the vile evil. You're like, ugh, okay, like anyone, who else can we get that's interesting? And maybe that's the thing. I'd love to see more prompts about like how to create interesting characters that that you could play, but or would stand out perhaps rather than again, as we just keep saying, this is like if this is your first horror RPG, you don't need to go too far. But that's the only thing I would like is like what other kind of weird characters could I make
Yeah. Well,
that would work well in the setting.
I did notice that the character sheet PDF does have a blank sheet at the back, but I didn't see any
Hmm.
like instructions on how to like structure a character. I guess you could figure it out. But I do like it's interesting that they included a blank character sheet. And like, I guess you could kind of make something. I don't know.
I think ultimately my sort of takeaway from this is that I think it's really interesting, and I definitely would recommend reading it through if you like us, we like reading new games, going, oh, that's quite interesting. But I think for me, this is useful for new players and GMs now, and maybe for me it's fine. Uh, I wouldn't necessarily be rushing out to run this straight away myself, just because I think a lot of the stuff it puts at the forefront, which I do like. I already do using other systems, but that's just because I've just learned to do that, perhaps. And the system doesn't work for me, but I like this aspect of the system, so I will put it first. Whereas if you're not confident to do that, or it's your first time doing it, I think this is a good start. And then easily you could make changes once you've got a few sessions under your belt. You're like, actually, the circle stuff, I enjoy it, but maybe I can make more tweaks to it and try things out and stuff like that. So I think it's a good starting point. And I definitely wish I had something like this a couple of years ago when I first started like looking into all RPGs and stuff. Mm.
Yeah. And yeah, writing lore is the hard part sometimes, and the fact that it's got tons of
Hmm.
it straight up front,
Oh, 100
absolute
page.
bonus, absolute bonus.
Hmm.
Some people will just love that because this
Mm.
they don't want it. I mean, I've never used one, but the module books in D&D must sell pretty well because they keep making them. So yeah,
Hmm.
people like a little bit of guidance there. So I think it's
Hmm.
solid for me. I think it's quite solid just for that alone.
Mm. Yeah, yeah.
Um, cool. But yeah, you can tell it was written
Mm.
by GMs and people who homebrew writers. You can tell it was
Yeah,
written
yeah,
by
yeah.
by homebrewers.
Definitely improvisers and yeah, people who rule of cool, that sort of thing for sure.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I love how blasé it is about combat. Like combat takes up half a page. It's like don't get too
I
bogged down with
know, I
combat.
know.
It's basically the first line. Um, so I
In
love
this
how
world, combat doesn't
quickly. Yeah,
exist.
I love how quickly
It's
it kind of
like,
dismissed that. It's like yeah, it's just another action role. Don't worry about it. But I think to sum up, our feelings are kind of that it's a very pretty book. It
hmm
seems like we haven't played it yet, but it seems like a very solidly designed game with a lot of interesting lore.
yeah.
Um, but it does also feel like a first attempt, someone's first Like
Yeah.
this is their first. They wanted to keep it relatively simple,
Yeah.
recognizable tropes and everything else.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, and so it's a safe game. Is that, I think that's
I
fair to say?
I think that's a fair assumption. I think it's a safe game for them to try and engage whether or not people will get it. And I think people, obviously we've got it. Like I said, I think all my foibles I've had with it will probably go away once I play it. I feel like for me it is safe, and I'm like I enjoyed the bit of it I read, but then I'm not rushing to run a game of it myself.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just because I've run lots of different horror games, so I've got different tastes perhaps. But I'd happily like there's nothing in it that I go, oh, this game's not for me, because I know ultimately it's not necessarily about the game or setting. It may be about the GM's and the other players around the table's experience as well, because that's what fuels quite a lot of RPGs. I think about good 70% is the experience you have around the table, people engaging with it, and then the 30% comes from the setting and book, which I know that doesn't seem a lot. I mean, I know different people have different values perhaps, but I think like if I can get excited if other people are excited around the table, for me personally, and I feel like it's a solid, like you said, it's a solid attempt, uh, and it's something I don't know if I'm passionate to run a game of it myself. Happily playing it on Christian,
Sure.
but not just to alleviate any fears on that front. But yeah, I don't. I just because I think I've read other ones that made me more excited, perhaps.
Well, thanks for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having
I'm
me.
gonna do my YouTube spiel now for when this goes up on my YouTube.
Go
Thank
for
you
it.
for watching. Please do like and subscribe and hit the bell. Check out my other videos that are probably popping up somewhere around, possibly blocking out our faces right now as the YouTube pop-ups appear. But yeah, do like and subscribe and check out all my other stuff talking about RPGs, actual play stuff, more actual play stuff going up at the moment, including this World Mind Board Game and things. But I can't promote things directly because they come out of date. You could be watching this way off in the future, and whatever I say could be nonsense. If you want to support this channel, check out the Ko-fi link below. Buy us a cup of coffee for a couple of quid. Check out my start playing links, all my other links below. I'll put some links for Fiona. Do you want to do your own plugs? For what am I
Yes, quickly.
rolling?
As I'll do it. Yeah, absolutely. So when I'm not blathering on about an RPG and going, I like it, but it could be improved, you can find me on What Am I Rolling, which is a twice monthly tabletop RPG one shot podcast where we do lots of different RPG systems and interviews with game designers. As I was sort of mentioning, I did like a world building one recently, which was very interesting because it turns out it's really difficult to make a world, but it was a good experience. So I'd recommend go checking to listen to that if you'd like to. If you're like Fiona, you and Christina talked about like Candela, Obscura and all these things, and actually I just wanted to hear you talk about D&D like you did at the first 20 minutes of this stream. But if you want to listen to me talk about D&D and how we can improve it and make it more accessible for everyone and using the lore of it, check out the DM's Book Club, which is a weekly D&D book club podcast where we talk about Dungeons and Dragons and buy the books so you don't have to. So there you go. That's What Am I Rolling in the DM's Book Club, where you can find wherever you listen to podcasts.
Yeah, excellent work. And also, if you're watching this at an appropriate time, then I'll put a link to my Kickstarter in the downstairs as well for
Yeah.
my first board game,
Yeah.
which may or may not be may not be up depending on what time of life you are watching this video. Thank you for joining me, Fiona. Thank you for
Thank
watching,
you.
and that's the end.